We'll get our meeting called to order. Thank you for joining us on this very exciting day before the first day of school. Madam Secretary, roll call, please.
Yes, all board members are present, and we have a quorum.
Wonderful. If you'd all like to stand and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Moving right along to consent, may I get a motion on the table to approve consent?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
Discussion? All in favor? Aye. Thank you. Next, we move on to Mr. McMichael for the bid award for Carmel High School.
Thank you. This is a bid award for some work, primarily sound work, that we're doing in the Dale Graham Auditorium as well as the Black Box Theater at Carmel High School. The recommendation is to a company by the name of ESCO Communications, and the bid amount is $232,000. And this project's being paid from bond funds that we sold previously.
Okay, thank you. May I get a motion on the table to approve the recommendation?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
Discussion? All in favor? Aye. Thank you.
Thank you.
Next, we have Dr. Dudley with the
Yes, thank
Social
you.
Studies.
This evening, I do have, bring before you some rental and fee change corrections. I do have uploaded corrected fees for social studies for kindergarten, first, second, and fifth grade. When you approved the document at our July 20th meeting, the fees were recorded incorrectly in the overall spreadsheet. And also, you received some information earlier today, some changes. The state will now pick up the charge for PSAT in 11th grade, so that would be a reduction for our 11th grade students. And then also the just a change in the fees for our PE classes, switching that to health and IPR, where CPR would be taught in those classes rather than in PE1. So the fee hasn't changed, it's just switching the class. So there are some changes in those fees, and those are all highlighted in the yellow on the sheets in front of you.
Great. Thank you very much, Dr. Dudley. May I get a motion on the table to approve the corrected change or the fees for the upcoming 2015-16 school year?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
Discussion? All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Great.
Thank you.
And moving right along, we have our legislative priorities. For this portion of our workshop, we're going to meet down at the tables, and Mrs. Hackett is going to lead us with a little background material from Mr. McMichael and Dr. Wall. Yes, let's move down. Okay, I'll just bring you here.
Is everybody ready? Get started. So, as a legislative liaison, I'm just going to facilitate this evening's discussion, which is our workshop. And our goal is to come to consensus on our legislative priorities, our Carmel legislative priorities for the next short session. So just to let you know kind of what we're going to do is you have two documents that were attachments to the agenda, and they're in front of you here. And so that we don't have to go back and forth, and Dana has them to be slides too, right? You have them as, okay. First, we're going to look at the 2014-15 legislative priorities for the Carmel Clay School District, which looks like this, and in general, how it would align with the ISBA proposed documents. So we're going to try to stay on that and just kind of do a quick review of, kind of where we are and what it says. And then the bulk of our discussion will be the second document that looks like this, the ISBA proposed legislative priorities for the 2016 legislative session. And we'll talk about how that aligns with Carmel Clay interests, and at that time I'll be asking Roger and Nick probably to chime in and give us some background or some explanations of kind of where we are in the district to help us in our discussion on that. But that's really where I see the bulk of our discussion, because we're pretty familiar with this other material and where we stand on that. And then ultimately, like I said, what our goal is to kind of merge those two in some way or form and come up with our Carmel Clay legislative priorities for the 2016 legislative session. And we can always work on little tweak details, from here, but we need to come to a pretty decent concession at this time. It's kind of our timing we've done in the past, and it's a good timing to keep with. And then I'll just finish at the end with a report on the State School Data Reporting Committee, because it kind of relates. I'll just give a brief report then. So with that, I'm trying to organize myself here. If you could go ahead and look, and Dana has it up there for those in our massive audience. What we used as our district priorities, legislative priorities for the last session. And remember that last year was a long session. They the General Assembly comes up with the 2-year state budget. So a lot of our emphasis on these did deal with long session issues that we will need to vet through and kind of pull out going forward. So if you just look at the first goal, those really have to do with equitable and adequate funding issues. And very briefly, 1A has to do with the discrepancy in per pupil funding to address that. That's a long session item, really. I bet our General Assembly would claim they've addressed that. We would probably claim that there has been some adjustments for faster growing suburban districts, but in no ways that addressed that our ADM per funding is still several, what it was several years ago. But either way, that's a long session item. It has to do with the state budget. 1B is similar. It's fully restoring the funds that were pulled by the state across the state, the school district funds, back in 2010. Those were not fully funded. That comes from a state budget. So again, that would be a long session priority. And 1C, the same thing. Our request was to consider including an annual cost of living increase in the funding formula. Well, again, this is a short session this year. It's not a long session, and this is a long session item. And then if you could just quickly skip down to 1F, that is also a long session item to fully fund state mandated programs. It always helps us if mandated programs come with the dollars needed, but that affects the budget. So my suggestion would be to not emphasize 1A, B, C, or D, 1A, B, C, or F, because we can't do anything about it this next year. So that really takes us to 1D as far as funding issues. That has to do with our operational referendum and ISBA's proposed legislative priorities. When we get to that, they give some specifics to focus on their number 4 priority. So I would suggest we have more of that discussion when we're hitting that one. And then with 1E, that has to do with flexibility between school funds, and ISBA's proposed priority number 2 hits on that. So at this point, I just want to stop a moment. Does anybody have any thoughts or ideas or comments or suggestions?
I still think F ought to stay in because they can mandate programs anytime, whether it's budget or not. So I think at any time they should not offer unfunded mandates to the schools. So I think that ought to stay in. Oops.
This one is.
Yeah, she turned them on.
Sorry, I should
should have been talking this way.
I think as long as you're not.
Okay, so that's a point. Let's note that. So when we look over the ISBA proposed priorities, we can kind of see how that might fit into discussion, or if it's in there, or how we can tweak things as we merge things. Any other thoughts? Yeah. Here.
Is that something that's going to be addressed? Are the unfunded mandates going to be addressed in the committee that you're serving on this fall or this summer? No. Okay.
No, the committee I'm on only deals with data reports, and only certain data reports.
Okay.
So nothing with programming at all. I think,
Just for reference on A, that where we go funding per pupil, where we are this year, is equivalent to where we were 7 years ago, just for clarity.
okay, and that's
just an
updated.
FYI.
Okay, and that's updated with the new percentages we're at. We're at about 2,000 or 7 years
But
ago.
2008.
So where are we on the list now?
I don't know that. I haven't seen a list.
Okay.
Roger, have you seen a list? I just wanted to clarify. We are where we were in 2008, 7 years ago. And when Pam asked, do you know where we are on the list? Because we used to be third from the bottom. I don't know.
We don't know, we haven't
a
seen those numbers yet? Okay,
list. I haven't seen a list on that.
okay.
And on the second one, when Pam and I met with all of our legislators, they point blank said, you're never going to get the money back.
Right,
It was not like maybe.
no.
I mean, they said,
It was
that was a recession.
Bosma definitely said that.
I mean, literally, you're not
Yeah.
getting it.
Right.
Okay.
And I know that Senator Kenley has no interest in the cost of living increase, doesn't think that's a fair measure. Those are just FYIs.
Mm-hmm.
But I think your point's taken, A, B, and C really are long session topics.
Okay, and we'll look a little further with F and maybe how it fits in the other ones. Okay, so that moves us on to our last year priority number 2, which talks about flexibility to make decisions at the local level, and which has really been near and dear to our heart, a priority for a while, and also ISBA. Their priorities have emphasized that too. And with that in mind, when you look at ISBA's proposed priorities for next year, really all 7 of them have to do with flexibility and local decision making and what's best for your district within certain parameters. So I think as we discuss the other document, we'll hit on maybe not these exact ones, but ones that have seemed to have trends across the state that interest a variety of districts in a variety of ways. So with that, I'll move on to our third one, which has to do with high-performing school district. That's legislation that we helped initiate and push through, and then it's been kind of fuzzy on how we can really utilize that, the teeth it has. So I'm going to ask Nick if you can speak a little bit to how our district is looking into that right now. And
As of Friday, I submitted a proposal for David Day's office to review to determine if we could do something different at the high school this coming year with final schedule that would be more student-centric. And so that would be, I think, something that would be House Bill 189 worthy. And David's going to review that, and I'll let you guys know. We're also looking at what else, and we've charged the high school, and Amy and I have talked with John Williams and his team, give us some ideas that they may have, and we'll see if it meets the intent or the spirit of HB 189. Instead of waiting, let's put some proposals forward and see what we can do.
Yeah, absolutely.
So we've got one already in the hopper, and hopefully David's group will say, yep, go ahead and do it. Much more student-centric schedule for testing. Maybe you can speak to it a little bit more, but we're not giving up that fight, just to put it fun.
Some other things, I know some neighboring schools have used some of the high-performing school for professional development time for the teachers. But what the roadblock they ran into was, because of the way the law is worded, you have to maintain the same number of minutes as you had the year before. So in order to do this, they had to start their school day 5 minutes earlier to make up the time. So that's always going to be an issue and that might be something to think about.
Okay.
Right.
A little more freedom.
Any other thoughts on that? Thanks, Nick. So possibly, it sounds like to me, although this is still a big priority of ours, at this point, we're looking within our legal parameters of what exists now and grassroots, what suggestions are coming from the high school.
Yeah.
And that's our, kind of how we're working on it right now as a district, instead of at a legislative level, possibly. Okay, well then, move on. And 4 and 5 were statute language changes, and those were addressed. So big check marks on number 4 and number 5. You can scratch those off the list. And number 6 has to do with accountability model and testing as it relates to instructional time. And again, ISBA, that's obviously a huge issue across the state and has been a big concern of ours. And ISBA's proposed number 5 hits on that. So we can, kind of work on that conversation on that. So,
Can I ask a question?
yes, please.
Just along those lines, I heard a rumor. Are we not getting ISTEP scores back to maybe January now? Okay.
Would you fill us in?
I haven't heard January. It's late.
We haven't received the date of when they're coming. We did know that there was a delay because there was a new test and they had to set the test scores, and the test scores were not scheduled to be set until the week of September 8th. So we knew they would be delayed, but then we did get word last week that many of the tests need to be rescored because of the issue with CTE. And so there's going to be further delay. We're not sure if the cut scoring process will need to be delayed because of that. As of yet, we do have some teachers that are on that cut scoring process. So we're waiting to see if that gets pushed back. But yes, the results will be delayed. We did know they'd be delayed, but we don't know the time frame yet.
Another big vote for number 6.
I would, we have,
Right, it wouldn't be
Give me the region.
not that those have been the
Form
driving
G.
criteria for them in the past.
Anything else? Okay, then we'll switch to that next document, and keep in mind Pam's comment and the other ones that seem to be hit, that I said are hit elsewhere. So we might have to refer back to the other one, but now we're going to the ISBA proposed priority document. And I just want to hit a couple things first to remind everyone. ISBA, we kind of have blinders on here because our board and administrators and even our community has been more involved in legislative education issues than what happens in most districts. What happens in most districts is not really an involvement from the board. This hasn't been an emphasis at all. There's some that do a little, and there's a couple like us that make this a priority. So with that in mind, a new executive director with ISBA, the push is let's have a whole state effort, that there's power in numbers and there's power in consistent message. And if you recall, I went to a grassroots training this past summer and passed that information on how we can work together. And even at our own little table, it was a variety of, no one had the background that we have here. So we're not a really good sample of how we work together. We're not the average at all. But there will be power in numbers moving forward, so to keep that in mind. Also to keep in mind, these are proposed at this point. These are these have been vetted at different, across time and at different points, and they're mostly derived, the main conversation is with, what was the position that you held for ISBA for a while?
Oh, I was that delegate.
But the position you held for them, so you're a liaison for the ISBA, not for our board, but
I was
the committee.
ISBA delegate, and then I was on legislative liaison, or the legislative committee for 2 years.
Okay, that's the legislative committee. So that's who's really looking at this. And they did bring it up at the grassroots and put some ideas back and forth, but it's mostly that committee that's looking at this, and they vetted it over time. So I don't think this is going to change. I don't think it'll change really at all from this. It could change just a little bit, but just to note, it's still proposed at this point. So,
Could you review the timeline when we hope that it will no longer be proposed and what they're moving forward?
yeah, I talked to Brian Smith, the executive director of ISBA, and he said the plan is the ISBA fall meeting is the 20th and 29th of September. Well, it's the 20th and 29th, and the delegate meeting is the morning of the 28th, and that's when it'll have final passage.
Okay.
And so there's really no other big time that this is going to be looked at between now and then, and that's why I think it'll be pretty much this. So I think we can look at this confidently and kind of get our ducks in a row. But I would suggest we don't take any official action until after that. But we do have a meeting that night, so I think we can work on that timing and still have plenty of time to send out letters or whatever we decide tonight that we want to do with this.
You can also stand up and make suggestions as a
Mhm.
delegate. That was-
Yeah, I've been there before. I've been a delegate before.
But I mean, if we make suggestions today, tonight, to this,
Right.
you could, at the delegate meeting, make those suggestions.
Right, absolutely. So there could be changes. There
Yeah.
very much could be changes. And I want you to note their setup. So in the past, ISBA's priorities were more of a statement sheet, and what they've really done, okay, they've not said this, but I think they've modeled them more how we've put that out there a little bit, but also included talking points that provide explanations and talking points, kind of both those. So just wanted to note that as before we go forward. Okay, with that, their goal number 1, transportation. Some of these priorities, proposed priorities, most of them have an A and a B. Some of them just have one area that they're concerned about. So the transportation, the 2 areas, I would like Roger to give us a little background on 1A here.
Well, this, I believe, is being promoted because with the circuit breaker language, there are districts that literally, Westfield, as close as Westfield, is set to lose as much as about 90% of their transportation funding. And of course, with 10%, they cannot continue to operate a transportation system as they know it now with 10% of their budget. We are very fortunate in that we're not anywhere close to those numbers. However, that doesn't mean it's not painful for us. But compared to others, we're in far better shape. But I think, I would be very supportive of this language, knowing what's happening across the state. And certainly, it's not that it wouldn't benefit us, but there are other districts that are in absolute crisis on this if something doesn't change.
Okay, thanks. And you bring up a further point, so we need to look at it from our point of view, because it would be our initiatives, but our priorities, but also to join in this state effort, so
Yes.
that we're. I think it's going to be a little bit of a compromise. So what is our priorities, and how do they line up with others' priorities, so that we're not
Well, our
splintering
priorities
it?
have to be aligned with the other schools' priorities because we don't know how far down the road it's going to be till it does affect us practically.
Exactly right.
It affects all.
It affects all of us.
Affects
It's just a
all.
matter of degree.
Yeah.
And
I mean,
I don't mean to say it's not painful for us, because it is.
it's money we
Quite.
But it's not to the crisis of losing 90% of our budget.
So that sounds like, from what I'm hearing, it's quite in line with how we
Yes.
think and what's happening in our district. That takes us down to 1B, where to drop off private school students, and there's some statute here. And my question is, currently, does this statute language affect our district? And then the second part would be, and could it affect in the future? Do we currently transport any charter or private school students and have to deal with this?
You know, I don't know for certain, but I believe we do. But in this case, this language, the language applies to all of us. So we don't have language on public school students that talks about dropping them off in a safe zone. I'm not saying that, you know, we try to do that, of course, but putting it in the statute that we're going to, you know, in statute that it says we're held to the standard of dropping the students off in a safe zone, as this says, is just opening yourself up for somebody to define or disagree with what's safe if something happens and apparently it wasn't safe. And up to now, at least, generally, schools have not been held accountable for, I mean, you know, things unfortunately can happen between the bus stop and either getting to the bus stop in the morning or if you're dropped off and, you know, getting home. And so this would put all of us in a pretty precarious position, I think, and just inviting people to file suit when there's something would happen that they would conclude that it must not have been safe or this bad thing wouldn't have happened. So I would think we would be very supportive of this language.
And that you hit exactly what Brian Smith said, in that this language is already in statute,
Yes.
but a definition of what is safe.
Yeah. I mean, we're providing the transportation if we're called upon as the statute currently reads. It's not, you know, the non-public or charter school student is afforded an opportunity to ride a public school bus. But this would take it, as I said, this is assuring something beyond what we currently have in statute for any student.
Can I ask a
But
question?
this is statute language, though, from what I understand. This is statute language.
It is, but the part about the safe drop-off part is new.
Untenable. Do we have, okay, so by law, we have to transport private and charter school students to schools within our district?
No, it's not what. Essentially, the statute, in so many words, says that we're required to provide them transportation if they're essentially along our routing. Well, since we cover the entire district, if you have a charter school within the boundaries of Carmel Clay School, then you're going to be along our route. I mean, the students. Now, we don't have to go into Marion County to bring a kid in or something, but if they live, essentially, if they live in Carmel, and the school is in Carmel, then they have right now we don't have to totally reroute in order to go pick them up. I've seen cases over the years where the student might be brought to one of our schools, for example, and then ride the bus to the other school or whatever. So it more or less has to be reasonably along our routing system. And therefore, the impact it would have potentially would be at some point you could overload the bus. There's always that one last child that could overload the bus, but I've not seen this language to be particularly a problem. Now, if we lived in a community that had a huge concentration of non-public schools, but that could be more of a concern. It's really not, and again, not really an issue in Carmel. Yes. This current language is a bigger issue I'm sure for IPS than it is for us. But the safe drop-off is the piece that it's not transporting the student; it's using the safe drop-off.
Well, if I understand what you're saying, and what I understood from Brian Smith is that that's what this is asking for, is that the language refers to safe drop-off, and he's saying, please alter that language because it's up for litigation. I mean, you're just opening yourself up for litigation because
I see.
They're requesting.
There's different ways to interpret.
Right, they're
yes.
wanting it to be changed
Yes.
though from that because it does open us up.
Yeah. Any other thoughts on 1A or B?
Another great law.
Because it sounds like Carmel Clay's interests are just right in line with what ISBA is saying are state interests on those two. Okay. Thanks. Let's go ahead, and we can always revisit something. So, Let's move on to number 2, Capital Projects Fund. Hold on just a minute here. Okay, so this was a priority that just has one element to it. And this aligns with flexibility. Roger, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but back in 2001, it sounds like from the talking points, there was some flexibility given to pay some utilities and some insurance from Capital Projects Fund and not just from General Fund. And this point is asking to make this flexibility more permanent, so that each school district can.
Yes, what happened is it's indicated here. Money was very tight in 2001, and so, and by the way, I'd cite this as an example where the state gave local school boards the authority to pay a small percentage of utilities or insurance from the Capital Projects Fund. When this language came in, that was on top of the otherwise maximum rate. So what it effectively did was it did raise the tax rate for property taxes. Okay? Over about 3 years, the amount that was allowable increased up to 3, and it got to 3.5%. It started out like 1%, and then it maxed out at 3.5, and then it was frozen at that, and has been since 2005. In our case, it's about $2.5 million, and that $2.5 million has been frozen since 2005, which means that any increase in utilities falls to the general fund now, which is why you'll see the amount in the general fund go up more than the rate increase, because all the increase is falling to the general fund. And I would say that this again is an example where you certainly were encouraged to do this, because otherwise you would have no increase in funding at all. But then the same legislative body that gave this flexibility is the same group that passed things like the circuit breaker and criticized local school boards for raising taxes. So they didn't give us money in the first place, but they allowed you to raise taxes and then criticized you for doing it. Now the threat is that they're going to stop allowing this, which would mean we'd have to cut into our general fund in Carmel's case about $2.5 million if this language were repealed. And so this is supportive of not doing that, and certainly I'd recommend that we would support that as well. In effect, at this point, it would be just like having a shortfall $2.5 million, because we would have to go in our general fund, not free up money in the capital fund, unless they probably wouldn't, because I think what they are doing is they would eliminate the ability to tax for this. So you wouldn't keep the money in the capital fund, you'd lose it there.
And have to pay it out of the general.
And then you'd have to make it up in the general fund.
So funding-wise, which is a priority of ours in the past, flexibility, which is a priority of ours in the past, it falls right in line with that.
Absolutely.
I'm just looking at the current statute that they cite, and it starts out by saying money in the fund may be used before July 1st, 2017 to pay up to 100% of the following costs of a school, corporation, utility service, property insurance, and then follows along with what Roger said with the 3.5% cap from 2005. So this may be something that's sunsetting on its own, that if there's not further action.
That's exactly what it said. After 17, if they don't do something with this language, we won't be able to continue to do this. And they threatened that this biennium, but they pushed it out. That's the concern.
Thanks.
And they threatened to eliminate this section.
Okay, so is everyone in line with what ISBA is proposing here, as far as that's in line with Carmel Place needs? Okay. Nice. That takes us to number 3, proposed legislative priority number 3, and that has to do with tax increment financing districts and how that money is used. And okay, Roger, I'm going to fall on you again, because you can decide what's easier, to pull A and B together or to talk about one or the other, but how school districts, or our school district, is helped and hurt by, how do we fall on this issue?
Well, I'm not aware of any, there may be any, but certainly Carmel and the ones I am familiar with, which is relatively few, but we do not get, the current redevelopment board does not make they do not give additional money to the school. They identify every year that they have needs for the money, and therefore there would not be money available to give to the school district. So that's kind of the underlying issue. This is one that, my own opinion, that's all it is my own opinion, and is that if there were voting rights on this, but to the extent that that was representation, but not enough to affect the outcome of the vote, I think it potentially puts school boards and local government in this position where our person votes to give money to schools, the rest of them don't, and I am so I'll say protective of the very positive relationship that we have with the city of Carmel and the county for all the other governmental entities. You know our relationship with the Carmel Police Department and all of that. I'm very protective of that and not wanting to. I would not want to support something that could result in it looking like, well, you won't give money to the school, and so we vote that you should. Our member says he should, and the rest of them say they shouldn't. Because the majority of them, all of them now, are certainly their responsibility is to look out after the interest of redevelopment. I mean, that's why it exists. And it doesn't mean they don't care about schools. It just means, just like us, if asked, we're going to spend our money on schools, not on city redevelopment. I mean, so it's kind of the reverse of that. And so I would be concerned about how this would be structured, that I would not want it to in any way create tension amongst governmental entities kind of going after the same dollar.
So you don't think we should have a school board member have a vote?
I don't know that we shouldn't. Those are the concerns, and so.
But should we be allowed some of the TIF?
Well, we already get some of the TIF money in the sense that when we passed our referendum, that 16 cents is not. I mean, that's not protected from the from the TIF district. So, therefore, we get about $2.5 million of the money we get for the referendum. About $2.5 million comes from the TIF districts. And in fact, the first year we didn't get that money, and
Why?
well, because that's not how the statute read.
Okay.
And so Luke Kinley, in particular, did not think that's the way it should be, and so I believe he was very much in the forefront of changing the legislation, and because in the second year the law changed, and that's when we started getting, and have ever since, and we'll get in the future, about $2.5 million. So it's that protected TIF district is not protected from referendum funding.
Go ahead.
Well, I know last year at the delegate assembly, this actual thing came up there, and they took a poll in the delegates, how many had a voting right and how many didn't. So there were people who are on their commissions who do have a voting right, who are on the school boards.
Yes.
But it's up to the local entity to decide whether or not they have a voting right or
Right.
not. So they're trying to take that decision away from the local
Right.
and make it a state decision, so that the state now will say all of these commissions have school boards will have a voting right.
Which means it also gets into that local control, and even though in this case it's not the schools, but generally I would say that school districts promote the notion of local control. And so is it only local control as it relates to schools, or is it just the subject of local control? Because I think you're right. Could be an example where it's limiting local control. It's just limiting on the redevelopment commission, not the school district.
Right, but then, those entities who had a vote also had a say-so
Yes.
on how the money was going out and where it
Yes.
was going. when you don't have a voting right on
Right.
a committee like that, you just sit and you listen.
Yes.
And you can offer an opinion. maybe,
Yes,
but
right.
it doesn't go anywhere.
Right.
So I think it's important if we're going to be sitting on a council or a committee, that we also be able to have some kind of voting right. We're required to sit on
Yeah,
that.
Mike could speak.
I mean, I can just address from my limited experience on the Carmel Redevelopment Commission. I mean, from day one, the fact that I didn't have a vote was not that I shouldn't speak up and say my piece of mind. And I do think that I've struggled at the time just because I'm trying to learn about school board and try to learn about all this stuff that they've done, that I'm almost kind of thankful that I didn't have a vote because I didn't know how I would vote on those things. So, I mean, you know, the statute clearly requires that we have a non-voting member appointed from the school board, and it serves at the will of the person that appoints us. So, at least from my experience, the vote doesn't matter, and all the stuff has been consensus, so that I felt if I had an issue, they would listen and take that into point. I mean, I'm more interested, I think, in automatically receiving a small percentage than getting a vote, and then that way it also takes out of their decision process and their negotiations, oh, well, you know, we can give the school X, or we don't. No, we've got to give the schools whatever it is, you know, and we've had discussions about, Nick, Roger, and I have had discussions. I mean, ultimately what they're doing is increasing the tax base, which helps us at the end of the day. So, you know, and we can just look at where we're sitting. I think that the transportation fund is a perfect issue, that since we've got a balanced tax base, we're not suffering. And, you know, that relationship goes a long way. So, and I guess just in terms of process, I mean, I understand we're going through the ISBA. I'm assuming at some point, we're going to say, this is our number one priority. Or, you know.
Yeah, my thought was go through this document, and then we'll pull our thoughts together. And what kind of format do we want to put forth, and what would be the pros and cons of different ones, and then come to consensus on that. So there's a variety of ways we can do that, and then we'll kind of hit that at the end, towards the end. Layla, did you have something to say?
Nope, I'm good.
Any more thoughts on that? I mean, I went back and forth on this, I have to say. In talking with Nick, we met earlier to prep for this, one thing that came up is, you know, we do have a good tax base, and so when our development actually pulls people to move here, whether they're businesses or the people to work in those businesses, and so we do get a higher ADM count, which brings money in. So that is a way that our TIF district sometimes helps us. It seems like there are ways, I guess the roads our school buses go on, there are ways that we get helped. The other issue that came up in my mind that makes me think, I don't know if I want to touch this number 3, is because there are discussions going on how the Redevelopment Commission has funded things in the past, and politically, do you fall on this side or that side? And I don't know if I want to put the district in the middle of that wrestling match.
I would echo Roger's point, and we want to keep a very positive relationship with the city, because it's genuinely we do. Coupled with Mike's experience, that he can voice the, you know, perspective of the school district, and then you put your cherry on top of the cake. I don't know that we need to touch this one.
Mike said it when he said, you know, they do, you know, they listen to what he has to say. Well, imagine that they didn't, and so therefore we get a voting right. Well, if they're not inclined to listen now, because he's one vote out of however many's on there, you can see if they were inclined not to listen, and now you have a voting right. You have 1 out of 6 or 1 out of 5. Again, if you don't have enough to potentially have the majority, you just become, you know, if they're not inclined to give any money, they're still not. One vote's not going to help.
And here's a little bit of background that Brian Smith gave, is in that most redevelopment commissions have an odd number, so that when you vote, you have a decision.
Right.
And so he thought he'd actually make more progress on this last year, and what he found out is nobody wants to make any progress because you're messing up with their numbers on the, making a
Take it to
decision.
an even number.
So it is kind of a, he hit a lot of gray area with this, and they actually talked in the grassroots meeting on which way to go. So let me put this forward. It sounds like here in our school district, in our area here, this might not be totally in line of what would be beneficial to us for our local decision. So something we might consider when we come up with format is maybe admit this issue and just not include this in, other districts might choose to include this through ISBA, but that we would choose not to. This wouldn't be one of our priorities. It would just be in somebody else's
Let them put it
document.
forward.
Yeah.
We don't need to.
Our goal is you're personalizing for CCS.
Right.
Omitting it.
I would agree. I would rather not
Personalize it.
damage or even give the illusion of damaging our relationship with the district or with our city and our county.
It's not like we're creating a list that we're going to oppose these things. It's just whether we're going to include
Make it
them
a
on our
priority.
list.
Just going to omit it.
Yeah.
And the fact is, we do have a great working relationship, and if supporting something is going to damage that, I certainly
Might not be our
don't
priority.
support that.
The money we would gain would not be worth the damage it might do to the camaraderie.
And we might not gain any money at all and have
Yeah.
a negative outcome.
And they stop listening to Mike at the table.
Mhm.
Yes.
I mean,
Yeah, it could be
which is a negative, yeah. It's one back.
I mean, I don't know for the point B, if Carmel Redevelopment Commission was told by the state that 0.05% or 0.01% or whatever it is going to always automatically go that they care. I mean, that would just be something that's going to be negotiated into their deals when they negotiate a TIF that, okay, we're not getting all this money back, we know. So, on one end, like Carmel has had a lot of TIF development and a lot of development, which, has helped us. It probably in a given year hurts us too. So, but again, I don't think it needs to be our number one
I think
priority.
it's hurt us in the past because the state funding formula hasn't kept up with the new students that they bring in.
I
That could
can-
be fixed different ways.
I can tell you that over the years, that there's been any number of times where people on both sides of that issue have really come to the schools wanting us to kind of get in the middle of it and choose up sides. I can't tell you how many times I've been called by a city council person or just a member of the public, and the gist of it was, aren't you guys losing a lot of money because of this TIF property? And that person, they wanted the answer to be yes. And then they would go back and say, well, the schools say that you're, causing them to lose money. On the other side of it, somebody that supports the TIF, doesn't the schools feel that the high assessed value that we have in this community is a result of the development that would not have taken place absent the TIF and so forth, wanting us to choose that side? So some areas of government are more, I'll say, political perhaps than others, and than a school board. And so that's just kind of the nature of the process, and I would rather that the schools not, have to choose upside or be it. That'd be better, in that, if that's legislated, we didn't do it or whatever.
The 2.5 million that we do
Yes.
get, because we can use the TIF
Through the referendum.
through the referendum,
Yes.
what percentage do you think that is of the big TIF funds?
Well, I don't know, off the top of my head, we're getting, say, $15 million in total, $14 million for levy. 2.5 of that's in the TIF districts. And then the total amount is in the context of our operating fund with the referendums, a little over $100 million. So,
But of the TIF money that comes into the district, to Carmel,
it's not TIF money that comes into the district,
no,
it's,
I mean, not to us.
Carmel TIF money.
oh, I'm sorry, yes,
Yes,
okay.
of the Carmel TIF money.
yes,
How much is our 2.5 million?
that I don't know.
Okay.
Because I don't know how much that generates for the city, or for the redevelopment commission.
Because that would give us a better idea, talking 2% of the TIF money or.
They didn't lose they didn't lose $2.5 million when we gained $2.5 million. Essentially what happened is that the TIF districts, when the referendum was passed, that 16-cent tax rate, the TIF district's not protected from that. So this was new revenue. And in fact, the first year, when you guys, when the successful referendum was passed, the TIF district gained $2.5 million because of our efforts to pass a school referendum. And they go, well, that doesn't seem right. If the referendum was passed for the schools, any tax dollars generated ought to go, and this new tax that the taxpayer voted to tax themselves for, it didn't say everybody except the TIF district. So the TIF district continued to be protected from what it was protected for in the first place, but it wasn't going to be protected going forward. It wasn't going to be protected from the new tax for the referendum. And thus we ended up, first they gained $2.5 million because of the school's efforts to have a school referendum. And then beginning the second year, we gained.
It reverted to
And
that.
Can we
it's
get
just
that back?
It's just a part of our, no, we didn't get back. But it's just a part of our 16 cents for the assessed value, applied to the assessed value, which includes now, for that purpose, the TIF areas.
So if I'm reading people correctly, it sounds like we certainly wouldn't mind an automatic small percentage coming our way, but
You don't care.
possibly not, that's not our priority because of our own local environment.
Yes.
Is that what I'm hearing?
That's what I'm saying.
That's what I'm saying.
Not a priority, but it would be nice.
Right, we're saying we would like that, but that's not going to be my priority.
But I don't think we need to be the one driving it.
Okay, and that's what we're coming up with, what would be our local legislative priorities. Okay, well, let's move on to number 4, referendum, because I have a feeling there's a lot going on there, and including our district and elsewhere, because as we all know, Indiana, although it was never stated that we've become a referendum state, if the funding's not coming from the state and it still costs X amount, we all have to pay our bills, then we have to figure out some solution, and that's one legal solution that we can use. There's a couple issues that this hits here. So 4A, okay, Roger, you might have to help me out again, but there's only a certain way you can put the question on the ballot. And the way it states, it's a more negative way that doesn't let you explain exactly how you're using the dollars or balancing the dollars.
Yeah. The current language is, as you describe it, it's very explicit. It essentially says to a taxpayer, are you willing to vote yes to raise your taxes 16 cents for this school referendum? And the district cannot put anything on there about how it affects your total school tax rate. This school board has always, since I've been, all the time I've been here, is very sensitive about the tax rate, and we certainly make every effort and try to manage that tax rate so that, for example, if we, and other districts have do this as well, or many of them do, and so we very well could be, when we come up on the referendum in 2 years, we will have some debt service, paid off, or the payment is lower. So the effect of it, as an example, we may have 3 cents less needed 2 years from now on our debt service tax rate. And we might want to ask the voters, would you be willing to essentially allow us to neutralize the tax rate, and we will reduce the tax rate here, say in the debt service fund, or possibly the capital fund. But we'd like to increase the referendum 3 cents. And so the net effect, we call it neutralizing, so the net effect to your tax rate for the school purposes would not change. But we're not allowed to share it. We're not allowed to present it
We'd like
that
to
way.
put that in the
And so
referendum.
this would allow us to do that.
So that would definitely benefit
The
us
net
in our
changes-
situation.
So the net change is 0.
Right, and we'd like the
Exactly.
taxpayer to be able to say, oh, okay.
I
right, so
understand
you're
that.
raising point, 16 cents.
But it's
Explain the whole
neutral,
thing.
right.
Because in effect, we'd be saying we most need the fund in our operating fund, and if we could could lower it in our, say, our capital fund, 3 cents, would you give us 3 cents over here in our operating fund? And
We're for this.
so we're definitely for it.
Definitely sounds like it. And then B, right now, the way you can ask a referendum question, or the timing that you can do it, is you can do it during a regular election, and then those are paid for, whether it's a primary or regular, November 1. Those are paid for from the state because they're already setting up for that. Poll workers, or the paid poll workers, not the volunteers, obviously, all that to set up. Or a school district can pay for their own special ballot elect. It would just be their own. That would be the only question, and people would have to come in for that. Those are the only two ways now. And so what B is asking for is, hey, can we have a third option? And that would be a mail-in ballot. So whether we would choose to do that or not, it would be a local decision option, is the way I see it.
Saving the cost of paying for it.
Right. Gives us whatever option might work for that district, and especially us. And then I would ask people to look back on our last year's priorities 1D, which states, due to the lack of funding from the state, the voters in Carmel passed an operational referendum in May of 2010. It's important that these dollars not supplant state funding. Corporations continue to experience funding deficits. The state should allow corporations to extend a referendum beyond the initial 7 years. I'm curious what others think about maybe adding that in, as we thought about omitting maybe number 3, but adding this 1D as a 4C, because we don't want our dollars supplanted, because that has happened in the past, and it would be nice if you could do it for more than 7 years. What are people's thoughts on that?
I think it's great, because I was around when they supplanted the money.
Absolutely.
So that was terrible.
Yeah, I mean, I think even in a non-budget year, we want the message to be that we're a referendum state, and we want to get away from that or give control back to us to decide how to spend our money.
If they're not going to fully fund schools, like they've said they're going to, then we have to find a way to fund it.
Yeah, I mean, and even if this is a non-budget year, we want the message to be consistent, because what we talk about now is what's going to be talked about
Yes.
next year.
The referendum is still relatively new. I don't know that I'm not aware of a school district that, we're one of about 30 or 33 now that have passed referendums. I don't know if any of them have come up for a second time, and if they have, I don't know of any that failed. But
The second one?
yes, after having passed the first one. So,
Okay,
for
that's
example,
interesting.
Carmel, if 2 years from now, we're either, if our referendum weren't approved, and just from one day to the next, literally, from 1 year to the next, we have to cut back $15 million. You can imagine the devastation to the school district. So certainly the 7 years, in my view, is a problem. It's also a problem that it's as soon as the vote's taken, it either continues or goes up or goes down, or, in other words, it's a winner take all. You either get it or you don't. And I think sooner or later we're going to see, maybe the economy tanks right when somebody's trying to pass a referendum. And ours still passed. But if it fails, particularly after it's first passed, and you've got everything structured, you're reliant. We're totally reliant on this $15 million. I mean, our district would not be the same without this. You're talking about close to 15% of our operating funds. And for that to go, even if it went away, which I certainly would support it being a longer term or something, but even if it went away, if there was some kind of phasing out, we've seen things, the de-ghoster concept at the state, where if you lost enrollment, you didn't lose all the money the first year. But if the time comes the district loses their entire referendum because after they've had it and it fails the second time around, it's going to be completely devastating to a school district.
Brownsburg did they lose it twice?
I think yes, but they never got it in the first place.
Well, yeah, that's what I mean, but they put it up.
Yes, yeah. But it's one thing if you just don't get it in the first place. It's another thing if you get it and then because you don't know that you're not going to get it until that vote's taken.
Well, and you don't have any time to anticipate what you
Right.
need to do if it doesn't get approved.
For that.
Is that a point in time that we could use a rainy day fund until we can
if you had money to put in it, yeah. But you first have to have money to put in it. But I mean, we're going to be faced with this because 2 years from now, I mean, well, sometime before 2 years, we're going to have conversation about what if if we're proposing a referendum, what's our plan if it doesn't pass? Because if you wait till it doesn't pass, I mean, you've got,
we've
just
gotta
the
have
nature of
a plan
operation, I
before
mean,
we
you've
begin.
got people under contract, and, we're always operating at least a year ahead of time. So, well, what if it doesn't pass? How are you going to position yourself so that you can reduce $15 million from one year to the next? And I don't know the answer to that, but it's
Not pretty.
a daunting question.
Okay, so what I'm hearing, let me know if I'm hearing this correctly, is that ISBA's proposed number 4, A and B, totally in line of what we support and what's best for our district,
Yes.
and to go ahead and add a C right in line with our old 1D. Okay, anything else on that?
Like you said, to make the transition.
And maybe add some language to make that transition
It's financially damaging.
a
I don't
longer
know,
time, or-
if that's even possible, but I just know that
Well, maybe that's
the
something we
immediate
can bring up in discussion when we meet, but
Yeah.
maybe not in the
I don't have a
last.
solution for it, but I know that if we, losing it from one year to the next, it would be just devastating to have that happen.
Okay, let me ask you this, just hypothetical. So, let's say, for example, if we would ask for it this year our current referendum isn't over to 2017, but if we'd say, well, let's just try the question this
Mhm.
year, then, and the voters say no, do we still have it to 2017?
No.
Then it's done. Okay.
Yeah, you can put it up anytime you want, but
It is what it is.
it
The
either
vote is.
restarts the clock, because you can't have.
Okay.
You can now, we were kind of the
Okay.
test case, because when ours passed effective 2011, we still had the so-called old referendum.
Mhm.
And frankly, the state, when our new one was passed, they initially didn't know how to deal with two. In fact, when the paperwork I got only included the one, the new one, and they basically absorbed the old one. I said, no, that's not right. This one goes for another 2 years, and then, because we intentionally started the new one to where the old one, it overlapped for 2
Right,
years.
purposely.
And you remember we discussed all that. But when it got approved initially, there was no overlap. They just absorbed the old one into the new one, and they didn't know what to do with it. And so they eventually, of course, approved both of them, and we had the overlap like we anticipated. Then they changed the legislation.
Okay.
And I think that situation kind of caused the change in legislation. And the change was that you cannot have two referendums.
Okay.
You cannot have two.
Thanks.
So you can put it up anytime you want. Yes.
General fund obligation to be in line with the CCS.
Yes.
If you're asking for those amounts too.
Yeah, that was my question.
Yeah. So no, you can only have one referendum. So if you put it up for a vote and it fails, and you don't get
One
to keep.
operational referendum.
Yes.
Get up a capital.
Yeah. Oh, yes. You can have the capital. Yes. I'm sorry. You can have I'm talking about operation.
So
Okay.
if we put it up early and it fails, that's failed, but the one that we still had a year left is gone too.
It's my understanding.
Okay, that was my understanding too.
Okay. Kathy, did you have a question?
No, we got it.
Okay. So we got that. Number 4, A, B, and then add a C in there. Okay, that moves us on to number 5 of the ISBA proposed student testing. Again, there's only one point here. We've discussed this a lot because this is, like I said, near and dear to our hearts. It was, it was down here. We had it as basically our 6th priority worded a different way. ISBA getting input from the entire state formulated it this way, which I think hits exactly on what we've been talking about. Benchmark testing helps our teachers, helps our kids. We understand that for federal mandates, we do need a summative, some type, and for state right now we do, but please look at this and address it so the student is the center of the of the decision. And growth. which would be, is that in here? Okay, okay. Okay, perfect. So, any further thoughts on that number 5?
It's a keeper.
It's a keeper. Okay, number 6. ISBA's proposed 2 parts to, under the priority of collective bargaining. And the first one has to do with, because several districts, not Carmel, but several districts have gone to different types of calendars. Right now, just a reminder, we can informal bargain kind of whenever we want, but formal bargaining doesn't start till August 1st. And when other districts have changed their calendars, that lines up not well at all. Ours, I would say, doesn't line up perfectly because our fiscal years starts July 1st, and we can't start bargaining till August 1st, but we haven't changed anything. I mean, that's how it's been since the laws changed. That's why they've hit, that's why they've suggested the change on A. My thought is at this point, well, what are people's thoughts on that? Or Roger, maybe, Roger, can you speak a little bit more to that?
You
We'll
think
start-
I might
let's start
have
with
an opinion,
Roger.
huh? Okay.
You're on a roll, Roger.
There's a couple of issues here. One, I think, one is, as we all know, we're, quote, only bargaining salary and salary-related, fringe benefits. Personally, I'm not troubled by the timeline. More significant than that, perhaps, is the student count comes in September, and right now, I mean, we get a student count in September, and the state certifies the revenue in October. It's either, I think it's either 30 days after the count or by October the 1st. But around October the 1st, we get a certification from the state, having now actually had the enrollment, official enrollment, which drives the money, as you know. So if you don't really have the money certified until October, then, you say you start in July or June or something rather than August, I at least don't feel it takes that much time to determine how much money you have and how much money you're willing to spend on salary and benefits. And, you certainly have difference of opinions, and we do. But there's kind of only so much to talk about there. And in some ways, and so potentially, the longer you have, you go from bargaining and negotiating to just drawing up, putting a line in the sand, and then you just go back and forth. I think that there's some benefit actually to kind of the time pressure. In fact, years ago, I remember a contract that said, we're going to settle this by the time school starts. If not, we're going to allow a third party to pick one, much like the current language, except now it's December. But districts had over the years have even chosen something like what we have now to create this, pressure timeline to get this thing settled. Mm-hmm. And so to extend the timeline, but still have the money certified in October, because you don't really know, because the state ultimately says this is how much we're saying you've got in the formula. And until then, like right now, we're estimating enrollment, so that estimates revenue. But I'd be the first to say, until the kids all show up, I don't know exactly how much we're going to get because it's driven by the enrollment. So I'm not sure we'd benefit that much by starting it formally, because certainly we can start it now if we chose to informally. Mm-hmm. And all that means, in my mind, is that you can't actually vote and actually settle the contract until August 1st, because there are districts that have unofficial as opposed or informal, as opposed to formal. And the only difference I know really in that is that you can't actually bring it to closure until after August 1st. By law, yes.
I had a question.
Yeah.
You said something about we don't get our certified revenue until like middle of October.
After the ADM.
So doesn't it seem kind of weird that they cut it off at September 30th instead of like
thinking the same thing.
October 30th? I mean, it seemed to me like it would be, if
Yeah,
you're
if
looking at the
anything,
whole
I'd push it the other
legislation.
way.
Yeah.
Instead
Yeah.
of starting early, I might push it
Yeah,
out the other way.
I mean, if
Except
you don't really
September
know
to
till
October 30th.
mid-October, it seems to me it benefits both parties if you don't start till 1st of September and end of October, and then you have the process of
Now-
November, December.
We used to my experience, we used to bargain always.
I know. I know we did.
We had informal and set the.
But we didn't have a cutoff date.
No, we did not, but we always knew that his numbers weren't coming until ABM.
That's the official, but, you know, once,
It was
as a,
September 15th.
yeah, as a practical matter, once school starts, you know, that number gets a lot cleaner, you know, as every day we have school. Now, it still won't be the final number the first day of school, but after a couple weeks.
Well, it's not state certified, but we do know.
Exactly. So yeah, we don't have to wait literally until September 15th or whatever it is to, you know, certainly not to settle the contract. I mean, it's not, for us, it's not going to change that much. It's just that the current process says they formally, well, by law, they certify the available revenue from the formula by about after the count. And so they're not going to do it before that. But they do it about 1st of October.
So what I'm hearing is that there could be districts around the state where this might make a priority list, but here, this might not make a priority list.
I think this will be a real hard push for them, based upon the fact that the law's somewhat newer and they're still working out the bugs. I like Part B.
Yes.
Let's talk about that next.
Yes, I like Part B as well.
Yeah, that we did last year as well. We talked about this last year, the ISBA.
We talked about that this morning a little bit.
I didn't realize we have a limit, so.
As to, but again, it goes back to if you, and I believe I'm correct in saying this, that if the parties agree and come to a tentative agreement, or come to an agreement, it still goes to the state, presumably, that they approve it. I don't know if they've not approved one, if the parties have agreed, for them to say, well, regardless of what you guys came up with, you know. But under that concept, if they have approved your agreement, then they're saying, well, you can't then go have another agreement through an MOU and change it.
Right, after December 31st.
Right. So this language would allow for some process that if the parties saw good, again, local control, if both parties mutually agreed that they wanted to do something, and again, this is going to, presumably it is something that's going to be salary and benefits, or it wouldn't be in the contract.
Right.
But for whatever our reasons, if both parties thought it was a good idea to do that, you know, you think locally we ought to be able to do that. Or at least there ought to be a process, even if the state kind of gets to approve it, that we at least have a way to do it.
Makes sense to me. Any other further thoughts on that? So it sounds like on number 6, as far as ISBA's proposed, that R6 would just have, RB would become the A, let's say, and we would just have 1 point under collective bargaining as a priority for us. Pardon me? Okay. And that brings us to the last one, priority that ISB has, and that's superintendent contract. And briefly, the law changed, I don't know, about 5 years ago or so. So if you have a new superintendent contract, which would come with a new superintendent typically, or any change to superintendent contract, that there's an elongated process where you have to advertise a public hearing in a specific newspaper, wait, I think it's 10 days, then have the public hearing, and then wait 7 days before the board votes on it. And there's some reason, I guess, for the, it's just kind of a weird way to negotiate, but if you're having a new contract, because there's a lot of new things, but if you're just tweaking it, what ISBA had found from input from the state is typically tweaks are just little tweaks, and you're saying to your community, hey, we got this thing that's so big, we need to have a public hearing, and then people, it almost becomes, you're so transparent in the communication that it becomes a miscommunication, and that, well, this is this huge thing, and it's really not. It's an adjustment.
For example, changing the date that we do your evaluation.
Exactly
So from
right. That would
May
have to,
31st to June 30th, and that is like, really?
that would need, that's actually a perfect example. So I would think this falls in line with what we have expressed in the past, that a more reasonable approach to this. If it's a big change, we're really, I mean, we always speak about it. We always bring it up publicly. We always talk about it.
And you always post it by law on our webpage, so it's already out there.
It's already out there.
Right.
It's on the
You don't
webpage.
Of course, it's a public document, but you don't even have to come and ask for it. You just pull it.
Right.
Pull it up at convenience at your home.
So all this is asking is you don't make this huge deal when it's one of the smaller changes. And that sounds like what we've all kind of talked about in the past of what we like.
But I mean,
Right.
I think if you're advocating to change that law, I mean, the way the statute currently reads, you have to have a hearing to approve a change of contract. I think the public perception when you're coming out, well, now what are you trying to hide? I mean, if it doesn't hurt us by having to follow a more formal process, I mean, you know, if somebody wants to come, I mean, as long as we've got the opportunity to explain at our meeting, this is why we're making the change. I mean, I just think conceptually, I don't know why this would be something that would be, and maybe it's not at the top of our list, but something that why we would want to push to do away with posting something that, you know, we're going to make a decision, you're welcome to come and weigh in on it.
Well, I think
Thoughts?
maybe if they made a list of minor modifications, examples of minor modifications, so that in the law, it states if you make a date change, or if you know, it's not anything substantial to the amount of money that the superintendent is getting, and it doesn't change the law that way. I don't see why we couldn't look at that.
I mean, we still have to take board action. It's just saying we don't have to have the big, huge public hearing and,
Wait 10 days.
Well,
and the expense of advertising.
I believe at the last public hearing, we had no
Zero.
public.
0 at the last one and one, the one before.
One time
But they weren't speaking about that, they were speaking about something else.
Here's another glitch, to tell you the truth, and I think David Day's working on this, is the, I forget the term they use, but the paper that you have to advertise it in is actually a paper that's not distributed in our area.
Right.
We already changed that.
we changed it.
Oh, have they?
That was one of the
Okay.
500 thing.
Oh, good. Because that didn't help with
Right, we paid for
communication.
Noblesville's paper.
Right.
Yeah, because we pay for those
That's why no one
advertisements.
came, no one knows they'll really care.
Well, any further thoughts? I mean, it sounds like Mike's saying if it's not broke, don't fix it. Obviously, other districts are saying it does end up being broken in their district because it flares up emotion that didn't need to be there. So any other thoughts on that, of
Well, I
keeping
think,
this in
too,
mind or not?
You have the expense, not that it's that high, the expense of making the ad. You have to place the public ad for the public hearing. You have to do that by such and such a date. It seems like a lot of hassle, and I kind of agree with Pam that I think if they list, I do think that salary or benefits, any of that change needs to be a public hearing. That's major.
Yeah.
But like if we were just going to change, okay, we're now going to evaluate him June 15th instead of May 30th, I don't know that that's a huge.
Well, I mean, I guess since that's the example,
Because that's
Out
what's come
there.
up already, that we,
yeah, but so then the solution, and I don't know if this is the solution to that. I mean, if you're changing, if we're just having an understanding that we're gonna do something a little bit different, I don't know that that is. I mean, the wording of the statute says at least 7 days before a contract for employment is entered into by a governing body and a school superintendent, the governing body shall hold a public meeting on the proposed contract at which public comment is heard.
But you have to place the ad.
Well, then the rest of it
10
goes
days
on.
prior to.
The rest of it goes on to what the requirements are of notice and all of that. So, I mean, we're talking about the details about if we're entering into a contract. I mean, it does not specifically say amending a minor contract for a minor reason. I mean, that's.
our attorney specifically said we would have to have a public hearing to change the date. Any change to the contract.
That's what they're trying to.
Well, I mean, and that's, I understand, I mean, but the question is, what's in the contract and what's not. I just think that we've got bigger fish to fry than to
I would agree with
worry
that.
about, we have limited ear of our legislators, and just with our message being, we are transparent, we want to be transparent, we're not hiding anything. This just to me says, why do you want to keep something secret? And maybe if the negotiation is, well, we're going to spell out certain things that if you make these changes to the contract, I mean, I don't have a problem with that. That's just, again, going against local control, micromanaging.
I think you're right, though. I mean, I said earlier, this is not going to be our number one.
Our biggest priority.
And so we could list it, and if we can't come up with others that we have higher priority for.
Well, one, as we know, all this is relatively new language, and so there are districts that found that, for example, they give their employees a raise, or they give their administrators a raise, but if they give the very same raise to their superintendent, they have to have a public hearing and advertise and do all those things. So,
Or change the contract.
well, in order, yeah, well,
That's how you
because
have to change the
because that's
contract.
changed the contract.
Right.
Now, if they put in the contract that they'll just agree to, the contract will give the same raise to the administrator as it gave to the secretary, or, you know, whatever, then it's not a change to the contract. So, but starting out, you know, people are trying to adapt to this new law that if you change anything, you have to have a public meeting, thus this kind of language. And so, and we know that the language in the first place, all this was a reaction to, you know, a particular circumstance, Wayne. But I wasn't saying names, but if I were. So it was a reaction, you know, to a set of circumstances, and so now we're trying to, you know, and
Fix
some would
everybody
say
else.
that maybe it was overkill or whatever, but, and that's what this is now pushing back a little bit to say, do we really have to do all this? We don't do it. You know, it's one thing to treat the superintendent, you know, vastly different than everybody else in a, what might be perceived as a negative way by, you know, excess compensation or whatever. But now we've gone to the other extreme. We can treat everybody kind of any way you want, except for the superintendent. You got to have a public hearing, and, you know.
So-
Yeah, so.
So what it kind of comes down to is, what's the consensus? Is this raised to the same priority as some of the other ones that we don't want to admit, or does this drop to the level of one to omit? Does that make sense?
Well,
Silence.
I thought this was really big last year. These are a lot of priorities. And I felt like they're all very important, but I wouldn't really want to go beyond what we have. And if there are other priorities that we feel like we need to include that are beyond what our
ISBA
ISBA is
suggestion?
suggesting, I would certainly support not including that.
Well, then we need to have a discussion of what we are going to include.
Correct, that's why we're
That's what
here.
we'll do, yeah. That's our next step
I'm
after.
just giving my feedback.
Any other thoughts?
I agree with
Okay.
Loyola.
Okay, so at this point, I mean, this is not a final, but we would omit this one, and then let's, it was just brought up, that concludes this ISBA proposed. Let's go back and visit, Pam brought up under 1F of our original, our last year's priorities, I should say.
Can I
original.
interject?
Yeah, yeah.
Can we have Dana then pull up, what format do you guys want to do? So then we can now jump into proposed 15-16 for common high school.
Format as in you want it to look like that, or you want it
What
to
format
look
do you
like
want? Do you like the
we already
format,
have?
do you like the ISBA format? Or the-
Talking points?
I don't like
15.
ISBAs, really.
What?
I like ISBAs.
What Dana could do then is pull that up as a Word document
Okay.
and start to just,
Modify.
yeah, because we can take then,
The talking point's kind of our rationale.
yeah,
Yeah, and that's another,
if we
That's a-
take the ones we had on the old 14-15 Carmel Clay and then put them into there,
in the right spot.
and then we have the proposed 15-16.
That's a really good point. I mean, I've gone back and forth, and at the grassroots meeting, we kind of talked about this, and like I said, we're kind of an odd case because most districts don't have their priorities already. This is their first
Right.
jumping off for this. And we went back and forth, and it's here are my thoughts, that we're going into short session. First of all, we're going into a statewide initiative that's based on power and numbers. And the more we deviate, I think we can deviate some because we have some of our own priorities possibly, but the more we deviate, we lose that power in the constant message. I think we need to be careful of that. And that we're going into a short session might be just a good time to jump off and try a different format. Because we're not affecting as many state budget or specific budget things for us. So, and then as we go through, we can decide. The talking points, at first I thought, okay, that makes it kind of lengthy. Lele just talked about length. On the other hand, it explains, for the most part, it says, you don't have to wait to talk to us. This is what we're talking about. It's right here.
We're not going to have, if we're not going to have 3 on ours, that takes a half a page on the budget.
Dan, if you got can you pull up the ISBA in Word format? It might be cleaner just to say, what do we want to keep of
and go back.
ISBA, and then go to ours and say, where do we put these in?
I think that sounds great.
That make sense?
Logical.
We basically talked about
So
this.
for time efficiencies, 1 is up there, we're keeping it.
But not as one.
I don't know, however you want to, let's just go through what we got and then rank them after that. Are these ranked? Is ISBA
You know what,
ranked then?
these aren't ranked, and what I would just say is, we can rank them different if we want, but then we're losing some of our consistency, so I would,
They are ranked?
Are they
you
ranked or
said?
they're
no, I don't,
okay.
not that was,
That's
well,
what I
let
was
me say,
clarifying.
not that was told to me.
Well,
That's not how they were
ours weren't
presented.
ranked last year, were they?
Yes, I thought it.
I don't,
Well, number 1, I think, was our most important. That's
I
why
thought
it was
so.
number 1.
We can change these, I'm just saying, everything you change, just know you're hitting on the consistency of,
Well, I mean,
as long as we
the
clarify
ISBA.
they're not ranked in any rank order.
well, I mean, I think we need to support and stand behind ISBA in terms of numbers are what's going to get it done. But I also think that we need to have Carmel Clay Schools legislative priorities. And so that when you guys go meet with our representatives, I think it's nice to be able to hand them one piece of paper that says, 1, 2, 3, or if we don't want to rank them like we did with our guiding principles, we've just got bullet, bullet. Doesn't matter what the order.
To Mike's point, what I'm suggesting then is we take the format, and these are your priorities for 15-16, CCS, and just stay with what ISB has, and then cull it down to where the discussion went, and then interject.
Okay, so let's-
14-15 back in with one set of priorities for that.
gets merged together.
Some of which are consistent with the ISBA's priorities.
Yes.
But I still think, as a school system, we have what's most important to us. Transportation, to me, is not our most important, so I don't see putting it as number 1, where it's just going to jump right out at you and say, this is what's important to Carmel Clay.
Well,
I
let-
think it needs to be further down the list.
Well, let's just
Okay.
get them all
Aren't we-
picked, then we can
Let's
rank
get
them
them up
later.
first,
and
and then
then
you
rank
guys
them?
discuss how you want to represent. Okay, then you can rank them or however you want.
So right now, it's just
One.
First edit.
And
not
then-
number 1, but
There are
1.
2, right?
Right, yeah.
Number 2 or
Can you just put bullet?
Yeah, I was
put
going to
bullet
say,
points
just
by
put,
then?
rather than 1, 2,
Get rid of the
3.
numbers, just make that a whole. How's that?
I still don't like it first, but.
Well, but we can change that.
Fix that.
But we can,
I know.
we're just not
This is not
changing.
indelibly- This is not indelibly carved in stone.
Not yet.
Not yet. And
Duly
then-
noted,
So-
Pam does not want this as number 1.
You want to go through your notes?
Put that
Sure.
back.
Under no circumstances.
So right now, we have the first bullet point right now
is
with an A and B underneath, and everybody seemed to agree to keep that. Then we have number 2, capital projects fund, which will be the second bullet point there. And that just has an A, the way they have it. We can look at that.
We were going to add E from ours, right?
Well,
That's on 4. We added,
E. You mean F?
One, you mean 1E, right?
Flexibility between school funds.
Well,
As a talking point?
I
or
would
as a-
say this, to me, what ISBA has come up with is a more specific we've stated it more general, and they've come up with a specific thing to focus on for this short session that can be focused on in the short session. So that's just me. I think this hits what would be a priority.
Let's come back to ours. Let's get through this. Then 3,
Okay.
we had TIF.
To omit. Totally take out that
Take
third.
that out.
Tax incremental financing, gone.
All
Yeah, the whole thing, yeah.
There you go.
Then the referendum would be the next bullet point, and we'd keep their language
And add a C.
and add a C that's comes straight from our 1D. Thanks for now. So can you do
Hang on.
that?
Right.
Huh?
See how they're beginning.
Well, we can fix that
Yeah,
later.
that's
can't
all
we?
fixable. Just keep this stuff.
So I guess just add that'll work. We know what it means.
Yeah. So where am I getting that?
Just put,
Just
You
put,
could elect,
1D.
Just leave,
you could put 2014-15,
1D.
1D.
and then we'll fill that in.
Okay.
Yeah, and then student testing
Stays.
stays.
And then, this is going to be a little tricky, collective bargaining, omit their A, which just became G. Magically.
G and talking point.
But keep the B that'll end up being an A. I mean, I don't like to give an A without a B, but we'll work on that.
You're good right there.
And then omit the superintendent contract, omit that one. Is that what we were saying? Or keep it? What are our thoughts? It's kind of gone back and forth.
I went back to collective bargaining. I think,
Oh, I'm sorry.
if I remember correctly, in the discussion last year, part of the issue was the September 30th because they felt that didn't provide enough time to negotiate a contract. And so they were looking to make the second one start at October 30th and then November 30th or something. So they were extending their time.
Extended negotiations and
Who's
shortening
they?
fact finding.
ISBA was talking about
Mediation.
extending.
No, I don't know what they were-
I don't know
past
anything about
September
that.
30th.
I don't know.
Because here it says current law mandates and must conclude by September 30th. That, I just read that, reread that, and that stuck in my mind
We
as
wanted
part
to
of the
keep that, didn't
discussion.
Well, I don't know if the maybe the
We want the
out, I thought.
MOUs, we were taking out 6A because the crux of what they're saying is they want to bargain any time through the
Right.
school year.
We want to keep
And
the
we're saying
current.
we want,
The current.
yes,
Which means
we would like,
eliminate 6A.
yes,
Yes.
that what works and well, what we feel is though,
And I don't know if the conversation has, as far as the state's level, I don't know if the conversation has maybe evolved over time, but what was brought up was that it would just be, it would be flexible. But we said, we're fine with it now,
and
not
these aren't
to hit
set in
those other
stone,
dates.
because once you have the delegates meeting on September 28th, you'll be bringing back more information to us to further digest what ISBA
I
brings
could very
forward.
well, or whatever you want, or we can approve it that night, because at some point we need to
Okay.
approve it to move on.
Right.
You know, to send it out. So our hope is to get it, I think if we get the main things here, we can vet a couple things over, email and stuff, but I'm hoping to get the gist of it done
And I think last year
tonight.
we had our basic priorities and we just added two, like 4 and 5, and we added last year because
Yep.
of what I came back with from the
From the delegates.
delegates.
You're right.
Okay.
And they're trying to be more proactive. They're moving up their line to be more proactive so that everybody gets on the same page. That's why I don't think
Okay.
it's going to change.
Change much
There
from
could
this.
be. I just don't think it's going to change that much, or at all. Okay, so that puts us down to, so superintendent contract. Okay, this is what I would say. If we're not sure, I would keep it then, because then it's on there.
How many total does that give us then?
There's 5 if you don't include it.
6 with it?
Yeah.
Okay.
And well,
Before you add in your last year's.
okay, well, let's
Well,
think.
we've
Unless you're
added,
adding.
well, I guess 4 has got
But some of
multiple
these are
parts.
connected. Yeah, right.
4 has got multiple parts, so 4 is really
We
A, B,
added one
C.
part. We took out 1-6 and we took out all 3. Okay, how about I suggest this, before we make a final decision on that, let's go back to last year's priorities. One thing Pam brought up was that 1F. It's important that the state fully fund state mandated programs. Unfunded mandates steal precious dollars from a corporation's general fund. Is that a priority this year? And if so,
just
where?
don't legislate any more mandated programs?
We could.
I think it should be there every year. I don't care if it's a short session or a long session, because they
That could
can
just be another-
mandate any day, anytime they want.
Well, I think we need a funding thing as a, number one
Yeah.
issue, and what the subparts being made, and if we don't have numbers, just, one of them will always, we need some sort of funding from the state is our priority. Whether, what that is if it's unfunded mandates, or if it's referendum, and that's,
It's kind of like our E and our F from last year are just like pretty much along the same things that they're trying to go with the capital funds. And they might be more clearly stated as our priorities from last year. I mean, really, that's what we want, what we said in E and F.
So maybe we keep 1, D, E, and F as top priorities for funding being, as Mike said, and Kathy, this is our top priority. Keep those.
Yeah, rather than adding it as a
Just say-
C,
Yeah.
bullet pointed as a.
You got 1,
as,
keep that
You know, kind of the
statement,
number
keep
1
D and F.
priority.
So keep
Or A, B, would be A, B, C under that, under funding.
D,
And that's the top one.
Then funding is the priority.
Yeah, I like that.
we're gonna need to tweak
right.
the words, but, yeah.
And under D, you could add the language under referendum if you want to.
I see what you're saying.
And then that's still under one,
Referendum.
because it's all funding.
Even the capital
Put it in all
projects
places.
fund,
Then would the
No,
CPF
not
go
those
under
places.
E?
Just move it from,
So then the first one only has A and B.
no,
No.
so you have 1
Yeah,
D,
B, A, and B.
and under D, 1 D, which is now becoming A. And under A, you could list,
Referendum becomes a subcategory of the bigger topic is
Oh,
funding.
I see, move it into that.
yeah.
Right, as a
Oh, okay, that's a good idea.
subcategory under the head,
Under
the head funding issue.
Yeah.
Okay, so D becomes A with subtitles
Yeah.
from
and you
4
move
here.
the referendum
That's a
from
good
the,
idea.
move the referendum from the ISBA to that area.
Right.
And the capital
It becomes a
projects
bullet
ought to be
point of
listed there,
funding
too.
rather than a.
So now you're
category
down
by
from
itself.
6 main areas to funding is one of your big areas, and
That's
boom,
big.
boom,
So
boom.
referendum's in that.
And
And
the
reference
capital
in there.
projects is in there.
And then the next,
Okay.
Our capital projects, though, that goes under D, or does that go under E?
I would think it's E.
Oh, okay, and then E would become B and include the capital, the ISBA number 2. Well, that's interesting.
because we have very clear statements from last, yeah.
And it keeps the funding then focused.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay.
And then we just have a C.
And then add F as a C?
Yes.
Boom.
Okay.
You won't have that because I was trying to talk.
Yes.
What might be.
You ended up with a dot.
Play nice. What might be a good idea, because there's no way you're gonna follow what just transpired here, is for, if you would, Tricia, take all this.
Pull it together.
Pull it all together, send it out to all of us, pick it, and then, if you
No, I don't mind at all.
does that make sense?
Yes.
Right. And I think, and maybe this might make sense, I think student testing is probably one of our top priorities, and that could be number 1, and funding could be number 2, especially if we're looking at student-centered.
Well, that was
But-
our number 6 at the bottom.
Well, and we just need to decide if we're going to do numbers or bullet, you know, do we have items that this is our biggest priority, this is our second or third?
I'll tell you what I'll do. How about this? I'll send out a draft that puts funding first. Okay, I'm kind of talking this through, so it'll be something along this line, like funding first and student testing second, and see how everything falls out. And then we'll have a visual in front of us. Because we all kind of know, I think we're talking about what we're thinking, and I think we need a visual to see. I think I need a visual to see. I'll put it
Carmel
that way.
Clay's legislative priorities fall into 3, maybe 4 main categories, and underneath those categories, you
What I heard was funding, testing, transportation, and bargaining. Was the MOU thing. That was kind of the remaining 4.
Well, we were doing number 2. We never said including it or not including.
Number 2 on
Oh,
last
I see what
year's.
you're saying.
That's local funding.
Well, what are your my thoughts are that there were several issues that, instead of stating it as separate, it was actually embedded. No, not the exact, that's what I said, not these exact ones, but ones that are still important.
Kept coming up as a priority on one person pushing school calendar.
When you say cool, I mean, we obviously can have different calendars. You're talking about the number of days as in the calendar, or?
I think she was talking about the beginning date.
I see.
Commerce wanted to rotate around the state fair.
But that doesn't seem to be as big of an issue right now because there's so many different
He tried,
things.
that person tried to push it last year.
Yeah, but they
Did he
get very
really?
far.
I thought with us, he said he knows it's dead.
Well, for a year-round
That
calendar,
doesn't
how
mean
could
we're
that
trying to.
possibly be?
Yeah.
There was somebody else also trying to.
Hey, we're really pretty good when we started, because there have been schools in session now for 2 weeks, so we're looking good.
Yeah, we don't get the letters. emails anymore. Well, let's ask this. Is that something that comes up, looking at our other priorities, that raises to a priority this year? Do we think school calendar needs to be, flexibility with school calendar needs to be on our priority list or more on our tickler list?
I'm thinking tickler list during the short session.
And just, I guess, process-wise, I mean,
Yeah.
we could approve, these are the Carmel Place Schools legislative priorities, and then we could also still approve, we're supporting the ISBA's.
Absolutely.
Right.
Ours are just personalized.
Right. So that we give that message, they could go to the legislators and say, look, 92 school districts, however many, were in favor of this.
We could ask for more flexibility within the high-performing school district law, just to give a little more flexibility on how you can actually use it. I mean, at this point, they didn't give us too much.
Yeah, this one is just fair.
No, they didn't.
I don't think they gave us anything.
How many do we have right now?
Well, if we do what
I don't
Roger
know.
suggested, it would be
Got
4.
one.
Funding, testing, transportation, and bargaining. And making those our headers.
4 headers. And
That seemed to
underneath
make
each header, there's
sense.
more than
Layla, can you say that again?
Funding, testing, transportation, and bargaining.
I think transportation was the only one.
I mean, the way they've got transportation, there's actually 2 parts. The first one could fit under our funding, one very easily. And so then the second one, you could even put that under student safety or something. But, I mean, I think, like you said, until you have a visual, it's,
We're kind of at the point. And the other thing we could do is even title it something like, CCS legislative priorities for the 2016 legislative session, and then aligned with ISBA legislative
And
priorities.
then as a thought, take them down to the session, and then after that, come back and finalize them for the last year.
I think that makes sense. I mean, we can assume we're going to put it on that 28th, because we can vet stuff through the email, on that 28th, September 28th agenda. If we need to pull it off, we can pull it out. But that way we're ready, set to go. And then we sent it out to certain people last year. We can just be kind of aligned with that. And I think you and Pam sent a letter out last year to certain ones. that process seemed to work pretty well as far as who we hit and some feedback and things like that.
We want to make sure it's on one page, because the way we did this, or that, was we put the data on the back.
Yeah, which actually, that's a good point. So that's something to just kind of watch. When I send this out, we can see if we are able to fit it here.
Font is kind of
Yeah,
small.
so we'll see that. We'll kind of hope that's our goal, and we'll see how that works out. If this has to be a separate sheet, that's probably not
Well,
We can make those.
No, I was just going to say, you could have a separate talking point sheet that so we are all telling the same consistent message, even though we're
It's
passing
ours out
out.
to the side. Well, that's actually a good point, too.
That's where I was going.
And maybe
Right.
when we send an email, we will also have the talking points, so they will have that if they choose not to meet with us.
So one clean one with talking points.
Okay. Okay.
And like then we're on the same song sheet. You know, we sit as
Always, yeah.
legislators, we're sitting at the legislative breakfast, same message.
Same message. Okay, that really hits, that really sums up everything else I have. Does anybody have anything else to add before I give them the report I happen to lose here? Oh, anything else? Okay, I'll get that out to you in the next day or 2 or 3.
Okay.
Or maybe
4 or
just
5.
More
We've
than,
got time.
more than 12 hours or something.
Until September 28th.
Okay. Anything else on that before I move on to this report on the committee? Great, thank you. Thank you for the great discussion. This gives a lot of good information. Nick had asked me to give an update on the committee I'm working on, the School Data Reporting Committee. So I really thought at this point, we've only met one time, and I thought this would be a great opportunity to get us all on the same page so we know actually what this committee's doing. Like Layla actually already had a question this evening. So Senate enrolled Act 500, which became known as the Education Deregulation Bill, together with a few other acts from the 2015 legislative session, eliminated over 50 school district mandates, most of them coming from that piece of legislation. Part of what this law does is define this new School Data Reporting Committee, and I've asked to be the school board rep on that for the state. There's 10 people on that committee. And I'm going to use quotes from the law so that there's no confusion, except that it is a little legalese, so there is a little bit of confusion, but so that we're all on the same page. So this committee is, quote, to review all regulations or forms required or proposed by any state agency that seek to require a school to report data to a state agency or to the public. That's what we're supposed to do. Then our recommendations go to the state board, and it also includes the development of a standardized school improvement plan template. That's the big picture. Now, part of that law says there's a litmus test you follow, that we filter all these recommendations through. Quote, the committee may recommend the collection of qualified data, and the state board may approve the recommendation only if, 1, qualified data is not available to the public agency requesting the information from any other source, and, not or, but and, 2, benefit from the collection of the qualified data is greater than the overall administrative cost of collecting the qualified data. It has to pass both those two. Amy's like, yeah, right. Now, the law further stipulates, quote, that in the future, quote, all reports required to be submitted to a public agency of the state by accredited schools must be collected electronically and must be collected through one regularly scheduled consolidated report that's collected no more frequently than a quarterly basis, which would make your life a lot easier, wouldn't it? Now, you've heard the term qualified data keep popping up. The committee can only review certain qualified data, and that's where a little bit of the glitch comes in. Qualified data means any data collection report survey, or other methods used by a state agency to collect data regarding assessments, performance, course enrollment, demographics, or any other information from schools or school corporations that is not specifically authorized by statute to be collected by the Department of State Board. So basically, it's almost anything you can think of except data collections required by federal or state law, which actually is several of them, reporting requirements used to place each school in a designation of school performance, the A through F, any collection of data if the Office of Management and Budget has approved a waiver from this law, any tax reporting, an investigation authorized by federal or state statute or regulation, or testing material. So that takes out a significant amount. A little bit.
Similar tactic.
Now, but the good point is that if it comes through one system,
That would be a big one.
and it helps connect, you're doing this because of this, which leads to this, which leads to this. So there's let's say, an education element. And the other part that we talked about is so it will be accessible. So if it's important enough for a state agency to use this information, then it should be important enough for a district to be able to access theirs and actually others. So if we say, hey, this township is doing a great job with this demographic, I can tell by this data how does this play out, that we can use each other as a learning experience. Okay, so with that in mind, we've met once. We met July 9th, reviewed our responsibilities and the qualified reports in general, and then we determined it's really a good group of people that really to do this right, it's going to take some time. But we needed to put forth an action item to recommend to the state board, and that was to continue everything as it is now and give a recommendation in time for the state board's September meeting. That way school corporations at least knew where they stood and weren't left hanging, or it wasn't done in a way where nobody had any time to look at it. So at this point, our August meeting and our September meeting are set, and we are to get all the information, all these reports that we need to go over, and we can work on it online with each other, so we'll do a lot of the work offline. Amy, this has not gotten to us yet. Every week I set time aside thinking I'm going to work on this. But Amy has already supplied me with hard copies of it, so I've prepped from the best I can, I would say. And I'm not the one, so we can make changes to things. I certainly don't want to be the one because I don't deal with these, but I will watch for that litmus test. That's, my role is more of the governance person role anyway. So that's where we stand. That's up. So.
I'm so glad it's you.
Well, I'm glad you are, Kathy.
Can I draw your attention to the guiding principles and vision and mission? That is there in all buildings tomorrow.
Oh, fantastic. Good job.
First day.
Thank you, Jennifer.
Nice.
Jennifer's design.
Thank you.
Well done. And the pocket that we talked about.
Yeah.
Should have those tomorrow. You were checking it tomorrow, and we'll obviously give you those as well. Reminders in there, too.
So now you can look like you're interviewing.
Maybe that's the problem. Do you have anything else you'd like to share, Dr. Wall?
Excited for tomorrow, as I said in my opening day. Great opportunities for students and staff. We're really excited for this.
Absolutely.
Do we want to just put on the record that an email went out today with opening remarks?
Yes.
Mine? Yeah, as I said in my opening remarks, very excited. That went out to all staff and parents, and highlighting the strategic plan going into action. So, like I said on that, we're ready to go. The buildings are ready. The kids hopefully are sleeping by now, many of them. And the teachers are ready. So, really looking forward to tomorrow. Thank you.
Any board comments? Okay, well, on behalf of the board, I guess we wish everybody in the audience and those watching a very exciting and successful school year. Oh, and happy birthday, Ryan. Ryan's new birthday. Fantastic. Meeting adjourned.
You all can know that my son, my youngest son, got a job. Adam Values from 10 to 6, 10 is night shift, South Michelle. I worked his first 9 months. So being the mom that I still am to this 22 year old, I'm not going to sleep. Like, I wonder how he's doing. I figured that he came home at like 6:30. I got like 4 hours of sleep last night. It's his first job. He was a little sore when he got home.
We should check all of them. Yeah. Apparently what happens is, this one's turning orange, so it's not red yet.
But it's almost done.
orange wet. I'm guessing these two then, yeah, see. They all work. See this, so.
And I looked at the battery life, and they all seem really good too. Actually,
How long can it last?
this one was on mute. So, yellow and green is clear, because I have a full battery.
Okay.
But then if you did it again, it turns green, so if you want to
They turn it on.
the other one.
This one. That one looks
That
good.
one looks good.
So this one's good.
This one looks good. Let's test this
And
one.
you put batteries into it.
And two of them,
So I
but
think 3 of them are okay. This one's good, and that one there's good, I think.
It is. Yeah, this one's good.
Okay, so
So
you get,
we'll change these two.
yeah, because this, one of these left. Two of them are new. Two of them you put in, and one of them left. One of them left. These two are dead.
These are okay.
Looks like
These look like they're okay. We'll check them right before the next one too. Next time we use them, make sure that it's at the top. Yeah, so this one definitely covers the.
yes. Red, red. Red, red.
Yep, I think so.
We watched this good.